Thank you for joining us here. I am seated with New York Times-bestselling author Beth Macy, and her book inspired the, I want to say Emmy, but multiple Emmy-nominated show, Dopesick. Thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, it's great to be back.
Yeah, and now you're back out with another book, Raising Lazarus, Hope, Justice, and the Future of America's Overdose Crisis. Does this kind of pick up where Dopesick left off, or is this a different approach to an ongoing issue?
Both. Good question. It's really a follow-up to Dopesick. When I finished writing that book, and the main person that I'd been following for 2+ years was dead, all I was seeing is kind of the failures of our government and our health systems and our criminal justice systems to accurately address the issue. I was really pretty bereft, and I told my husband, I'm never writing about this again. And then as I started to go around the country speaking about the issue, I started hearing about really positive things. And so then I was like, after about a year, I was like, I'm not letting this go. I'm going to do my next book about this too. And I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, but I knew I didn't. I mean, Mr. Rogers says, follow the helpers. Mm-hmm. And I know I always do my best writing when I'm writing about kind of heroic people who are doing unexpected things to help the least of us. And so I embedded in with some harm reductionists, and we can talk about what that is, as well as some treatment innovators and some activists who are still in the front lines of trying to hold Purdue Pharma's and the Sackler family's feet to the fire.
When I read the title, because I went in blind, I had no clue what it was about, I didn't read the description, I thought it was going to follow someone's life. I thought it was going to be someone named Lazarus, and we were following them from childhood to perhaps, the struggles that they experience as it relates to addiction. It wasn't that at all. This was very educational.
Thank you.
Was that intentional? Because it didn't, I really felt like at one point I was reading like an educational piece, like a peer review, because you wanted to teach me about what was happening. Was that your intention?
Well, I always want to write just a really gripping narrative nonfiction. Like, that's always my goal, write something I'm proud of the way it's written. But this book can also be read as kind of a guidebook on how to fix the opioid crisis, or the overdose crisis as we now refer to it. With this settlement, this opioid litigation settlement money about to hit communities, some of the distributor money has already hit the state coffers. A lot of communities aren't really up to speed on what the best way to turn this crisis around is. And I thought, let me go give attention to these creative, gritty, on the ground folks who are really doing the Lord's work, because they inspired me. And hopefully by telling their stories, I can inspire some of these gatekeepers who are going to be deciding what to do with the money, how best to spend it.
There are so many people, these angels, if you will, who are out there doing this work, many of whom were putting their own selves at risk of losing their jobs. Many years ago, before some of these programs like the needle exchange program became legalized in different areas, what do you think when you're talking to these people led them to this work? Because I don't imagine for everyone it was just the want to help. Why would, because there's always people who need help, but why help these people?
Well, because they saw the need. And so some people, like, I follow a lot of peer recovery specialists, and those are people who are in recovery already. And some of them, it's the way they keep sober. That helps them keep their sobriety by helping other people. And, that's a long time, 12-step kind of, guiding principle. Others aren't in recovery, but they're just doing it based on their own spirituality, like Michelle Mathis, the Reverend that I follow in Hickory, North Carolina. She and her wife, Karen Lowe, started out as a food pantry in rural Hickory, North Carolina. And, they were passing out food in parking lots out of the back of their pickup truck. And they very quickly realized, this is 2009, before needle exchange was legal in North Carolina, they realized that about half the people that were coming because they were food insecure were actually IV needle users, drug injectors. And so they started passing out surreptitiously putting needles in boxes of granola. They'd empty out half of the box, put a piece of tape on it so they'd know which ones had the needles in it, and pass them out that way. They'd tuck in a little card that said Olive Branch Ministries with their phone number. So if a relative found out about it, they could be like, oh, how nice, they're going to church. And so I just think that's such a cool story of, you know, they're doing these baby steps to get this program going because they're seeing the need. I mean, this is part of their spiritual calling to do this work. And now, because they've managed to make inroads with law enforcement, with healthcare providers in the region, they operate 3 above-ground needle exchanges in that region, and they're doing cutting-edge care in a rural area, which is very unusual. You expect cutting-edge care in San Francisco and in Philadelphia, which are epicenters of the overdose crisis. You don't expect it in Hickory, North Carolina, and yet they're offering it. So I thought, if we can study, if you can do it in Hickory, North Carolina, you can do this work anywhere. How did they do it? And so, like, they're one of my main case studies.
Well, they, to me, speak to the hope in the title of this book, because hearing from some of the family members of those who have suffered addiction or unfortunately passed away from an overdose, we hear those stories, and a lot of time they just keep talking about they wish they could have been, the person would have allowed them to be there for them, or someone could have been there for them. And to hear that they are doing this work because they feel so called to it, that's the hope. What does justice, though, look like? And who is justice for? Is it for the victim, or is it for their family?
The justice in the case of the subtitle of the book is the activists that I follow that are trying to hold Big Pharma's feet to the fire. And so how to best to tell that story? Well, am I going to get the Purdue lawyers to talk to me? You know, they're making $1,790 an hour, their lead attorney. And, you know, they've got this huge apparatus, guards, one person in the book calls them, that prevent them and actually help them wrangle their case out of the multi-district litigation in Cleveland, where most of these 3,000 plus municipal and county cases have landed, into bankruptcy court. Make no mistake, the Sackler family is not bankrupt. They've got billions of dollars, much of it hidden in offshore accounts. But they're trying to get the benefits of bankrupt court by filing in White Plains, New York, where there's a single judge who is known to favor what's called third-party releases. And it sounds wonky because it is wonky. And they're happy for you not to kind of understand the nuances of it. I was writing a piece for Oprah Magazine last week, and the editor said, well, should you put something in there, you know, now that Purdue is paid for you know, what they did. Purdue hasn't paid for what they did. I mean, that case is still on appeal in New York State. And, you know, it's just such a sticky wicket. People think that, oh, we can solve this with this money, but not if the money's going to go to the same old drug war, programming, abstinence only programming. I mean, we've got to get this money back. We've got to put the attention on who the real culprits are, not your cousin that's sitting in jail because he was using, or not my cousin because he was using a user amount of dope and sold it to somebody. I mean, a lot of those folks are in jail. Jail is the #1 way that America treats people with opioid use disorder. Richard Sackler's not sitting in jail. And the thing I love about the Dopesick show on Hulu is you can watch the show in 8 hours, and you can not only be entertained, but it puts the focus on who the real culprits are. Not these folks, many of whom were initially addicted through no fault of their own, or people we may know in the community like Tess Henry. She was initially written, but then, you know, she was able to buy it on the black market because all of us were prescribed way too many opioids for the slightest little thing. So they were just sitting there in our medicine cabinets. And a lot of people just started out stealing their parents and grandparents OxyContin and other opioids. And a lot of people got addicted that way too.
It was an avalanche after that.
Yeah.
One after the other. Well, congratulations on the success of Dopesick. How did you feel when seeing how well received something that started out as your brainchild?
I'm just so honored. I mean, and just so pleased. I really haven't had any negative feedback on the show, and really have had some amazing feedback. One woman reached out to our writing team to say that after watching our show, she picked up the phone and called her addicted son for the first time in 3 years. because she began to see that he was a victim of this too. He was part of a much larger story. And so, you know, the book did really well. It was a bestseller, sold a couple 100,000 copies. The show has been seen by more than 10 million viewers. So that is truly like, you know, James Baldwin said, if you can change the way a person thinks about an issue, even by 1 millimeter, your writing will have changed the world. Think about the way the show is changing the world. When you have people start to understand, as I've said over and over, who the real villains are, you can start to make change around the stigma, which is still the #1 cause of this 88% treatment gap. Only 12% of people with opioid use disorder in the last year have managed to get treatment. That's horrendous for the wealthiest nation in the world.
I love literature because you can write this book and I can have a totally different understanding of everything that you wrote. You can mean it one way and I can perceive it totally different. And that's the beauty of literature. But one thing that I feel like I did understand that you seem to be intentional about with this and Dopesick, humanizing the victims of addiction. I think a lot of times people, because of how we have treated addiction in this country and the overdose crisis, we do see them as criminals. You talked about the treatment usually is jail and not actual treatment.
And not treatment in the jail. Like no MAT, medication-assisted treatment, in most jails. I spotlight Fairfax County because they're real doing cutting-edge work there in the jail there. They're letting harm reduction group come in and with their peers, the peer recovery specialists, counseling people in the jail. They offer them MAT counseling, like really good counseling with MSW level, you know, social workers. And then here's the really critical thing they do in Fairfax that most jails wouldn't even consider. At the moment people are released, which is when, by the way, they're 29 times more likely to overdose and die, the peer picks them up and takes them to their next place. Make sure that they have a way to continue getting their buprenorphine medicine and make sure they have a place to live. And that's all because of one sheriff willing to really tick off some of the deputies who didn't think it was right, thought it was like coddling inmates, or hug-a-thug is a word I hear a lot. And she was willing to take the heat. Of course, she's in a blue dot, you know, in Virginia, and that's been her job her whole career, so she has a lot of power there. So what I like to say whenever I'm talking to any group is like, if you know judges, if you know sheriffs, if you know police chiefs, if you know probation workers, talk to them about the research, because I don't think people are intentionally like doing things opposite of the evidence-based way. I just think we're also inculcated by drug war thinking that addiction is bad, people who use drugs are bad, they're criminals, they're moral failures. That until we bother to really like peel the onion and really understand what happened with this story, we don't really understand that these are victims too.
Is what they're doing in Fairfax County realistic for every municipality in the country?
Absolutely it is. It absolutely is, because they start to see results. They start to see that the same people aren't coming back over and over and over. Similar thing happened here in Roanoke with the ED department at Carilion. I interviewed the head of the emergency of 6 hospitals back in 2017, and he said, we don't think that's our job to give buprenorphine in the ED. So young Tess Henry, she was in the ED numerous times for overdoses and abscesses. They never treated her addiction. They fixed whatever that immediate thing was, let her go, and then she's back to using the next day, because if she doesn't, she's going to be dope sick, right? So by 2019, Dr. Burton changed his mind. He got all of his docs waivered to prescribe, and they started doing it. In the first month alone, he had 30-some people connected to treatment. And I said, how does that feel? You've potentially saved 30 lives. He was on cloud 9. He said, I feel like doing mental cartwheels every day. Now he goes around to other hospital systems and tells them how he did it. So that's one person in power, educating themselves, admitting they were wrong. That's hard for people in power. You know, he's not an elected official, so maybe it's slightly easier for him. But he had to, you know, go against the grain. And look, there was cutting edge research out of Yale that he was able to point to and say, there is such good data supporting this. So I am just so proud when a person with power does that, because I mean, he's saved lives, no question. That one person has saved a lot of lives right here in the Roanoke Valley.
I want to put a pin on local response and efforts and go back to the Sackler family. You focused on them a lot in Dopesick, but you also talked about them in this book. Why bring them up again?
Because they were the originators. I could have picked, I mean, there's so many cases right now. There are 3,000 plus cases in the courts. The MDL, which is this really thorny, it's thought to be the most complicated litigation in American history. That didn't interest me as much. I wrote about Purdue and Dopesick, so they're still in the news every day. And what I was really interested in is how do you hold their feet to the fire during COVID when the activists couldn't even go and protest outside of Judge Drain's courthouse, although eventually they were able to do that. And, you know, and the shenanigans of Mike Quinn, who was the lawyer for the ad hoc committee on accountability. I just thought he was fascinating, and so he's a big part. He's Nan Golden, the famous photographer's lawyer, and he really kind of was the architect of this activist response to this.
Is this heavy work for you?
You know, Dopesick was super heavy. I'm not gonna lie. I was pretty distraught and bereft when I finished that. This was not heavy. This was an easy, not easy. It was hard because everything was happening in real time. And how do you write a book? It's not gonna come out till a year after you finish it, but it's still accurate and timely. So that was the challenge there. But everybody I was writing about was doing active things. They were doing positive things. They were working around systems, some of them working around laws. And they're just so inspiring and so innovative. You know, there's a bureaucrat I profile in Mount Airy, North Carolina, who I was very skeptical at first, a former DEA agent, Marine, and there was just something about him. I thought, this guy gets it. And so I watched this little town go from saying, when they overdose, we should let them die and take their organs, to now they're doing some cutting edge care. And how does a bureaucrat pull it off? Because that's where we've got to be. We've got to have our bureaucrats on board, because that's who's going to be deciding how this money is spent. And when Mark Willis in Mount Airy is willing to stand up and prove to his constituents and to the leaders in that community that these are people worth saving, because they're going to like help us get jobs. You know, there are real financial reasons why this is a group of people worth saving. I watched that little town go from having 500 job openings that it couldn't fill to 1,800 in the course of like 18 months. And so we don't have workers for these jobs. They were bringing people in from Puerto Rico. And there are just so many reasons, economic development, I mean, other than the main one, which is just, it's the right humane thing to do, why we should really care about this issue.
Alice Walker, a fantastic author, said that she writes because of curiosity, emotion, and because she was challenged as a young child. Maya Angelou said her trauma and her silence made her want to write. Shakespeare said his curiosity and his interest in the fact that he said he was a good writer made him want to keep writing. Toni Morrison says education made her want to write. What makes Beth Macy want to write?
Oh, what a question. That's amazing. I'd like to go back to James Baldwin, who said, if you can change one mind, even by 1 millimeter, then you've changed the world. And that sounds like really high-minded, and I think I'm hot stuff. And that's not what I mean. It's like, we need to change our minds around this issue. And I've always written about outsiders and underdogs, even when I was a newspaper reporter here at the Roanoke Times. Those are the stories that are my jam. I grew up poor, first person in my family to go to college, and I really had to struggle. And I think, you know, we are a nation where only 36% of Americans have a BA degree. And so what you see, like, kind of trickling out for that, dovetails with so many of our most intractable issues. And so I'm always looking for stories that help us understand why we have become such an unequal society. And this is a major one.
The book hits store shelves next week, right?
Yeah, we're doing a big event downtown at Charter Hall on Monday. And if you want to sign up, I think there's a fee, but you get a book with it. It's on booknofurther.com. Our local independent bookseller, Dolores Vest at Book No Further.
What do you want people, what mindset do you want people to be in as they begin to read your book?
Just just trying to open your mind and realize, like, I had biases too. We don't see our own blind spots. And just sit with the material and open your mind, and you'll be blown away by some of the work that's happening out there.